You've probably planned a trip that felt different from a vacation. Not a beach resort, not a city tour, not a relaxing getaway, something else. A place you felt you needed to go. Not wanted, needed. Maybe it was a childhood home after someone died. Maybe it was a battlefield where a relative fought. Maybe it was a place connected to something you care about deeply, a cause, a memory, a turning point in your life. And when you got there, you probably didn't do much. You just stood there, looked around, felt something you can't quite name. The trip cost money, took time, often involved discomfort, long flights, difficult terrain, physical hardship. And yet afterward, when people asked if it was worth it, you said yes. Even though you can't fully explain why. Why do humans travel to places that aren't pleasant, aren't convenient, and don't offer anything you couldn't get closer to home? Before we keep going, if this kind of quiet thinking is your thing, you might want to subscribe to Belief Explained Simply. These videos move slowly, sit with questions, and don't rush to conclusions. And if you know someone who enjoys conversations like this, feel free to share it with them. All right, let's keep going. There's a pattern that appears across every major religion, and most minor ones, and even in secular life, if you look closely enough: pilgrimage. The act of traveling to a specific place because that place means something. Not because it's beautiful, though it might be. Not because it's comfortable, though it rarely is. But because being there, physically being there, in that exact location, matters in a way that being anywhere else doesn't. Muslims travel to Mecca, not once if convenient, once in their lifetime, even if it's financially crippling. Christians walk the Camino de Santiago, hundreds of miles on foot, blisters, exhaustion, expense. Hindus bathe in the Ganges, even though the water is polluted, even though it's dangerous. Buddhists circle Mount Kailash, a 32-mile trek at high altitude. Some do it prostrating the entire way, lying flat, standing, stepping forward, lying flat again. It takes weeks. Jews travel to the Western Wall to place prayers written on paper into cracks in ancient stones. Sikhs visit the Golden Temple. Shia Muslims walk to Karbala. Baha'is go to Haifa. Different religions, different destinations, different rituals once they arrive, but the same core behavior, traveling somewhere hard to reach because being there does something that staying home can't. Here's what's strange. These journeys don't make logical sense. If you're Muslim, God is everywhere, right? Omnipresent. So why does it matter if you pray in Mecca or in your living room? If you're Christian, isn't the kingdom of God within you? So why walk 500 miles to a cathedral in Spain? If you're Buddhist, isn't enlightenment about letting go of attachment to places and things? So why prostrate around a mountain? The theology often contradicts the practice, and yet the practice continues. Has continued for thousands of years. Millions of people every year choosing hardship, expense, and danger to go to a specific spot on the map. Not because their doctrine demands it, necessarily, but because something deeper does. Let's sit with what actually happens on a pilgrimage. First, you leave home. That sounds obvious, but it's not trivial. Leaving home means leaving your routine, your identity, your role, your comfort. At home, you're a parent, a worker, a neighbor. You have obligations, expectations, a self you've built over years. On pilgrimage, none of that travels with you. You're just a pilgrim, walking, seeking, moving towards something, and everyone else on the path is the same. The CEO and the janitor are both just pilgrims. The distinctions that matter at home dissolve. That's not accidental. That's the point. Second, the journey is hard. You walk until your feet bleed. You sleep in unfamiliar places. You eat unfamiliar food. You endure weather, altitude, crowds, illness, and that difficulty matters because difficulty does something. It strips you down, removes pretense, makes you vulnerable. You can't maintain your persona when you're exhausted and in pain. The person who arrives at the destination isn't the same person who left home, not because they learned something, but because the journey wore away the layers. Third, the destination is specific. Not just any mountain, this mountain. Not just any river, this river. Not just any church, this church. The specificity is essential, because specificity creates focus. If the sacred could be anywhere, it's effectively nowhere. If every place is equally holy, then no place feels holy. But if this one spot, this rock, this water, this building, is the place, then being there has weight. It doesn't matter if that weight is real in some objective sense. It's real in experience. And experience is what changes people. Here's something worth noticing. Pilgrimages aren't about arriving, they're about going. Yes, there's a destination. But ask anyone who's completed a pilgrimage what the most meaningful part was, and they rarely say, reaching the end. They talk about the walk, the people they met, the night they couldn't find shelter, the moment they almost quit, the conversations, the silence. The Camino de Santiago has an official endpoint, the cathedral in Santiago de Compostela. Pilgrims are supposed to venerate the relics of St. James. But most pilgrims will tell you the cathedral was nice, but not the point. The point was the 500 miles before it. Similarly, Muslims describe the Hajj not primarily as I stood at the Kaaba, but as I was among 2 million people, all dressed the same, all moving together, all equal before God. The arrival matters, but the transformation happens in the going. Now let's ask a harder question. Why does this pattern exist across religions that have nothing to do with each other? Islam didn't copy pilgrimage from Christianity. Buddhism didn't borrow it from Hinduism. These traditions developed independently in different regions, different eras, and yet pilgrimage shows up in all of them, which suggests it's not about theology, it's about something human, something in us that needs to go somewhere difficult, for reasons we can't fully articulate and come back changed. There's a psychological concept called liminality. It means being in between, neither here nor there, neither who you were nor who you'll become. Victor Turner, an anthropologist, studied pilgrimage extensively. He noticed that pilgrims exist in a liminal state. They've left their normal life but haven't arrived at the destination. They're in transit, in suspension. And in that suspended state, normal rules don't apply. Social hierarchies flatten. Strangers become companions. The usual defenses come down. Turner called this communitas, a temporary community of equals, bonded by shared journey and shared vulnerability. It's fragile. It doesn't last. Once the pilgrimage ends and people return home, the hierarchies reassert. The roles return. But for a moment, there's a different way of being, and that moment changes how you see everything else. Here's another pattern. Pilgrimage sites are often hard to reach. Not always, but often. Mecca is in the desert. Kailash is at high altitude. Camino de Santiago is hundreds of miles on foot. The Ganges requires navigating crowded, chaotic cities. You might think, if the goal is to get people there, why not make it easy? Build a highway, install escalators, offer shuttles. Some modern pilgrimages have done this, and something changes. When the journey is too easy, it stops feeling like a pilgrimage. It feels like tourism, because the difficulty is the filter. It ensures that only people who really want to be there make the effort. It ensures that arrival feels earned, not purchased. And it ensures that the journey itself does the work of transformation. You can't walk 500 miles and remain unchanged. The person who finishes is not the person who started. But you can take a bus, and the person who gets off is the same person who got on. The hardship isn't punishment, it's the mechanism. Let's look at what happens when people return from pilgrimage. They're often different, not dramatically, but subtly. They're quieter, more reflective, less concerned with things that used to matter. They've seen something, not with their eyes necessarily, but experienced something that reset their sense of scale. Standing among 2 million people at the Hajj, you're reminded that you're one among many. Your problems are not unique. Your life is not the center. Walking the Camino, you realize you can endure more than you thought. That strangers will help you. That letting go of control doesn't mean collapse. Bathing in the Ganges, you're participating in something thousands of years old. You're a momentary part of a river of human seeking that flows far beyond you. These aren't lessons you could learn in a book. They're not insights you can talk yourself into. They're experiences, and experiences change you in ways that ideas don't. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Modern secular people often mock pilgrimage. Why would you walk 500 miles when you could just pray at home? Why would you bathe in polluted water when you could baptize yourself in a clean pool? Why would you spend thousands of dollars to stand at a wall when you could build a wall in your backyard? And from a purely rational standpoint, they're right. It doesn't make sense. But humans aren't purely rational. We need ritual. We need symbols. We need physical experiences that anchor abstract beliefs. And we need to do things that are hard, specifically because they're hard, to prove to ourselves that we care. Pilgrimage is irrational. That's not a flaw. That's the point. It's a deliberate choice to do something costly, something difficult, something that makes no sense, except as an expression of devotion, longing, or need. And that expression matters, because it's not enough to believe something in your head. You have to enact it with your body. Interestingly, secular culture has created its own pilgrimages. They don't call them that, but they function the same way. Burning Man. People travel to a remote desert, endure harsh conditions, participate in a temporary community, and return transformed. Music festivals. Young people spend enormous amounts of money, camp in mud, endure crowds and discomfort to be present at a specific event. Political rallies. People travel across the country to be physically present at a march, even though they could support the cause from home. Memorial sites. Gettysburg, Ground Zero, Auschwitz. People travel to stand where history happened, even though they could learn the history from books. Same pattern, same structure, same function. Leave home, endure difficulty, arrive at a meaningful place, experience something that changes you, return different. The language changed, the theology disappeared. But the human need didn't. There's something else pilgrimage does. It creates proof, not proof to others, proof to yourself. If you say you're devoted to something but you've never sacrificed for it, how do you know you mean it? Talk is easy. Intentions are cheap. Anyone can claim to care. But if you walk 500 miles, you've proven, to yourself primarily, that it matters. Not logically proven, existentially proven. Your blistered feet are evidence. Your exhaustion is evidence. The time you gave up, the money you spent, the comfort you sacrificed, that's evidence. And that evidence becomes part of your identity. You're not just someone who believes in this. You're someone who went there, who did the thing, who endured. And that can't be taken away. It can't be argued away. It's lived experience. Here's a question that won't fully resolve. Is pilgrimage about the destination, or is the destination just an excuse for the journey? Some would say the destination is everything. The Kaaba is sacred. The Ganges is holy. The cathedral holds relics. Without the sacred destination, the journey is just walking. Others would say the destination is a symbol, a focal point. What matters is the transformation that happens along the way. The Kaaba could be anything. It's the walking toward it that changes you. Maybe both are true. Maybe you need the destination to justify the journey, but you need the journey to make the destination meaningful. Without Mecca, there's no reason to walk across the desert. But without the desert walk, arriving in Mecca is just standing in a city. The two are inseparable. The goal gives purpose to the path. The path gives weight to the goal. Let's notice something else. Pilgrimage is often done with others, but it's also deeply solitary. Yes, you're walking with thousands of other pilgrims, but you're also alone with your thoughts for hours, days, weeks. That combination, surrounded by people but internally solitary, creates a unique psychological space. You're not isolated, but you're not distracted either. There's companionship without the obligations of relationship. There's community without the performance of social identity. You can be silent for hours and no one questions it. You can cry and no one finds it strange. You can walk at your own pace and no one judges. That freedom is rare. At home, you're always performing some role. On pilgrimage, you can just be. And in that space of being, things surface. Grief you didn't know you were carrying. Questions you've been avoiding. Realizations you weren't ready for. Pilgrimage doesn't create these things. It just gives them space to emerge. Here's another layer. Pilgrimage often involves physical suffering, and suffering when chosen does something different than suffering that's imposed. Imposed suffering, illness, loss, injustice can break you, can feel meaningless, can create bitterness. But chosen suffering, fasting, pilgrimage, endurance challenges can feel clarifying, purifying, even empowering. Not because pain is good, but because choosing pain for a purpose gives you agency. You're not a victim of circumstance. You're an agent making a sacrifice. And sacrifice, when voluntary, creates meaning. The Muslim who saves for years to afford Hajj isn't resentful of the cost. They're proud of it. The cost proves the commitment. The Christian who walks the Camino isn't complaining about the blisters. They're grateful for them. The blisters are evidence of devotion. The suffering becomes sacred, not in spite of being difficult, but because it's difficult. Now here's the thing that might make both religious and secular people uncomfortable. What if pilgrimage isn't about God at all? What if it's about us, about our need to mark transitions, to prove commitments, to step outside normal life and see ourselves differently? What if the sacred destination is just a culturally agreed-upon excuse to do something humans need to do anyway? Religious people might object, no, the Kaaba is genuinely sacred. The Ganges is genuinely holy. It's not just a psychological trick. And secular people might say, see, it's all just psychology. The sacred is an illusion. But maybe that's a false binary. Maybe the sacred and the psychological aren't opposites. Maybe they're two descriptions of the same thing. Maybe humans need sacred places because we're the kind of creatures who create meaning through physical experience. And calling something sacred is how we encode. This place matters for reasons beyond utility. The psychology doesn't disprove the sacred. It explains why the sacred works. Let's return to the beginning. You've probably taken a trip that felt like it mattered, not for fun, for something else. And when you arrived, you stood there, looked around, felt something shift. Maybe it was a place connected to loss or heritage or a cause you care about. And afterward, you couldn't quite explain what changed. But something did. That's pilgrimage, not the religious word for it, but the human experience underneath the word. The need to go somewhere difficult, to endure something hard, to arrive at a place that matters, not because the place has magic powers, but because the journey there and the act of being there does something to you that nothing else can. It marks a transition, it proves a commitment, it creates a memory that becomes part of who you are. And maybe that's why pilgrimage exists across every religion, every culture, every era, not because God demands it, but because we need it. We need to leave home and come back different. We need to walk until we're stripped down to something essential. We need to stand in a specific place and feel that being there means something, even if we can't say what, especially if we can't say what. The destinations are still there: Mecca, Santiago, Kailash, the Ganges, the Western Wall, and people are still walking toward them, not because it's easy, because it's hard, not because it makes sense, but because some things don't need to make sense to matter. And maybe the question isn't why pilgrimage exists. Maybe the question is, where would you go if you let yourself need to go somewhere? What place calls to you, even though you can't explain why? And what's stopping you from going? If this raised something for you, an agreement, a disagreement, or even just a question, you're welcome to share it in the comments. Not answers, just what this brought up for you. I read them. Please subscribe, like, and share. This helps us grow and create more interesting content like this one.